found something I didn't expect while researching my last video. I was watching this interview of Jony Ive, former chief designer at Apple, and he's asked this question about smartphones and their unintentional effect on our mental health.
I think when you're innovating, of course, there will be unintended consequences.
But in the middle of the answer, he recalls something that the two had talked about a few months earlier.
Patrick and I were months ago talking about some of the architecture that was associated with the Industrial Revolution. There are examples. We could talk about this.
Google Victorian pumping stations.
And so I did. Crossness Pumping Station, one of two sewage pumping stations built in the mid-1800s in London. What I saw was a building that looked almost like a cathedral, meticulously decorated and full of color on the inside. But when I saw this, I had a lot of questions. What is it? Why does it look like that? And why is Jony Ive so obsessed with it?
You imagine this idea that sewage used to flow freely down the streets.
In order to understand crossness, we have to talk about cholera. Back in the 1800s, people didn't really know how to prevent cholera, which was a problem because cholera outbreaks were pretty devastating. Check out this political comic from back then. This man is wearing a copper breastplate and tying pitchers of water behind his calves to fend off the disease. That's because cholera, which was also called Blue Death, was a pretty scary thing. Victims typically died within 24 to 48 hours of symptoms appearing, which in this case was severe diarrhea and vomiting. This turned their skin blue from dehydration. During the largest outbreak in London, up to 100 people were dying per day. At the time, the leading explanation for how diseases spread was something called miasma theory. The basic idea was that diseases were transmitted by something called bad air. Or in other words, if it smelled bad, it was probably bad for you. And given the time period, that kind of made sense. During the Industrial Revolution, London was growing very quickly, more than doubling in population between 1800 and 1850. This inevitably led to poor living conditions. People were used to dumping their waste into holes in the ground called cesspits, and as more people moved in, those cesspits overflowed. And so these crowded neighborhoods with no way to deal with their human waste just started dumping it all into the street. And so, yeah, it probably smelled pretty bad back then. And it wasn't that no one knew how to solve the problem either. Engineers had been submitting proposals to the government to build a proper sewer system to deal with the waste, but they were repeatedly rejected for being too radical and too expensive. Human waste in the streets inevitably led to cholera outbreaks, and people blamed it on the smell and used miasma theory to explain why. But in the 1850s, this scientist, John Snow, he had a different idea. And so he started to study cholera outbreaks in London, and he came up with a new theory, that cholera wasn't spread by bad air, but by bad water instead. Here's a map John Snow made, centered around a particular outbreak in the Soho district of North London. Each one of these lines represents a death. He knocked on doors to interview the families and caretakers of those who died, until he realized there was one thing in common. They got their drinking water from the same pump, located here on Broad Street. John Snow theorized that the Broad Street pump was contaminated, and that sewage was making its way into the water that supplied this pump. And so he takes these findings to the local council, and after some debate, they decide to remove the handle of the Broad Street pump, and cholera disappears from the area soon after. Fun fact, you can visit a replica of the pump today, located a few steps away from where the pump was originally. But the street has been renamed Broadwick Street, and there's a pub right next to it named after John Snow. But turning off one pump wasn't going to solve cholera in London. In fact, John Snow's theories wouldn't become widely accepted until much later, and people were still dumping their waste into the streets, which is a problem. You see, London is located on a river, the Thames, and most of the city slopes gradually towards the river. And so all that waste people were dumping into the streets eventually made its way into the Thames, which turned it into an open sewer. Oh, and did I mention that some people got their drinking water from the river? Yeah, yikes. Then came a heat wave in the summer of 1858, where all of these issues became a huge problem. The sewage in the river, coupled with the temperature, resulted in a smell that was so bad, people were fainting when they got too close to the water. Charles Dickens wrote to a friend that year complaining, "I can certify that the offensive smells, even in that short whiff, had been of a most head and stomach distending nature." Queen Victoria and Prince Albert tried to go out for a pleasure cruise that summer and immediately turned back because the smell was so bad. This summer was known as the Great Stink, and the national government, Parliament, which is located here, right next to the river, acted pretty quickly after having to work a few days next to what was probably the worst smell they've experienced in their lives. It finally made them realize that after years of rejecting proposals, that building a proper sewer system was a necessity. And so Parliament pushed a bill through in just 18 days and chose a proposal by the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, Joseph Bazalgette, to save the city from its own filth. Man, it's crazy how fast politicians act when it's suddenly their problem. Bazalgette had been planning for this moment for many years. His first 3 proposals were rejected by Parliament for being too expensive and too radical. Still, he put a lot of care into designing this sewer system. At the center of the plan was to build a new network of large intercepting sewers running east, roughly parallel with the Thames. This system was designed to intercept and redirect the flow from the thousands of miles of existing local sewers, preventing them from reaching the river. Now I want to show you something that Bazalgette thought of when he was designing the pipes themselves, and to do so I've 3D printed these 2 pipes. You see how the one on the left is egg-shaped? Well, the problem that Bazalgette was facing was that sometimes the flow of the water was very high, and other times it would actually be quite low. And when there isn't a lot of flow, you still have to make sure that the water is moving fast enough. Otherwise, stuff just kind of gets stuck. Let me show you. Okay, I've just put like a 1/4 tablespoon of sand into each one of these pipes. And now I'm gonna pour some water down them. And ignore the mess, this is not the first time I've tried this. So I'm gonna pour the same amount of water down each of these pipes. You see how all the sand got cleared out of the egg-shaped pipe, but not the fully circular one? That's because the narrow bottom of the egg-shaped pipe was able to focus the water into a faster stream, which allowed it to carry more of the sand down out of it. Which means at times of low flow, the pipe should be a little bit better at self-cleaning. But since both of these pipes have the same cross-sectional area, the total amount of water that they can carry should be pretty much the same. He also designed the tunnels with a slight descent to keep the sewage moving, which meant the tunnels were pretty deep underground by the time they reached here, Crossness. Here, they built a pumping station that would lift the sewage 30 to 40 feet from the tunnels below and store it in these giant reservoirs located underground in front of the building. And then during high tide every day, they'd release it into the Thames, which would carry it out into the ocean as the water retreated. What's ironic about this plan was that Bazalgette was operating under miasma theory when he designed and built the sewers. It just happened to be the right solution, despite being for the wrong reasons. Cholera outbreaks stopped happening in London after the sewers were built, with the last outbreak happening here, shortly before it was connected to Bazalgette's sewer network. But this story is about this building, Crossness Pumping Station. Bazalgette commissioned it to house some of the most advanced machines of its time, and building a sewer system to solve a sanitation crisis makes sense. But why does this crucial part look so extravagant? In order to figure out why Crossness looked like that, I knew I had to see it in person. So I booked a trip, and I went. Okay, so I've just arrived here in London, and tomorrow I actually get to go visit Crossness, but there's something I haven't mentioned yet, which is that Crossness actually has a sister pumping station on the other side of the river called Abbey Mills. That station was finished a few years after Crossness, but it was built with a few extra flourishes, like check out these chimneys made to look like minarets. Unfortunately, it's not regularly open to the public, so I'm unable to go visit it. The next day, I took a tube, then a bus, then a train. And at the end of the track, the 160-year-old building emerged from the marsh. And once it was time to go in, I put on a hard hat and went inside. Wow. This is a sewer pump. To better understand what I was looking at, I talked to Rob Harris, who I met while I was there.
Hi, my name's Rob Harris, and I work at Crossness Pumping Station, where I'm doing things like tours and developing events there. The octagon is the central space. It's almost church-like in the way it's designed, with its sort of semicircular Romanesque arches and sort of colourful cast ironwork. We get the moniker the Cathedral on the Marsh, and when you enter that space, and I take visitors in there, and you look around it, and you really get this sense of being somewhere, on another realm almost.
He's right. The building didn't feel like a piece of industrial infrastructure. It felt almost spiritual. So Crossness it's a sewer pump. It's a building with a very utilitarian purpose. Why was so much effort put into making it look the way that it does? Why not make something a little bit more, or design something a little bit more subtle?
For the Victorians, there was a great pride in civic architecture. So whether it be bridges, libraries, train stations, all sorts, you can't just make it look mundane if it serves a great purpose to society, no matter whether people are going to see it or not.
So it was a way to show that they cared about public society.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you look closely at the ironwork, you can see these figs and senna pods, which were commonly used as laxatives back then.
Figs and senna are the main ingredients to a very popular Victorian medicine. Syrup of figs, still popular today as a laxative. So there is perhaps a bit of a joke going on there, a little bit of a nod and a wink to perhaps the function of the machinery. What is this system trying to do in natural form? So that's one of my favourite bits. But then you also have other flowers. You've got 4 pointed flowers in the main bit of the screen, which we think are dogwood flowers, and then above them you've got sort of 5 pointed flowers, which we think are blackberry flowers. And those were actually ingredients at the time for Victorian sort of medicine. Did the opposite effect, that brought you up. So those are quite fun.
Yeah. So something to start and then something to stop.
Exactly, yeah.
There are 4 rotary beam engines on site, and they all have very royal names. The only one that's been restored is called the Prince Consort, and luckily it's operating today. So tell me about restoring one of the engines. I noticed that there's currently one that's sort of in operation, and you're working on a second.
That's right. So we've got 4 engines. They're all named after the members of the royal family in the 1860s. So you have the rusty ends. We've got 2 ends of the beam engine house, one of which we're keeping preserved but we're not restoring. And in that end you've got the engine's Albert Edward, that's the future Edward VII, who was then the Prince of Wales. And you've got Alexandra, who's his wife. Then in the colourful end, so it's the restored end, you've got the 2 other engines. You've got Victoria, which is the one we're working on, getting restored at the moment, and Prince Consort. That was Prince Albert, that's Victoria's husband. He'd actually died by 1865, but they named that engine after him, and that is the one that was originally restored.
Now, it's very difficult to convey actually how large these machines are. To give you a sense, the flywheel is about 52 tons, and the actual beam is somewhere around 47 tons.
The volunteers from the 1980s worked tirelessly for more than a decade, and it was finally restored into action about 20 years ago.
Now, I should note it's not actually pumping anything. These engines were decommissioned sometime in the 1950s. London Sewage is now handled by a more modern pump that's electrically operated. Why do you think the architects are trying to invoke this almost spiritual sensation with the design of the building?
So, when Crossness is built, this is the high point of a type of architecture which is very popular, particularly in Britain, called Gothic Revival. It's trying to emanate what was seen at the time as the greatest period of architecture, the medieval period. So this is the period of churches and cathedrals. In some ways, it was also a bit of a reaction against the modernity that actually Crossness represents. So it was kind of a longing look back to this pre-industrial, pre-urban society. So Crossness, in some ways, it has these contradictions sort of wrapped up in it. You know, that's something that I think it's a special place to step into it and try and understand that mess of contradictions in that society at the time.
You know, I spend a lot of time looking up, and it's not only because building is impressive, but the machinery is very mesmerizing. It's no wonder they call this place the Cathedral of Sewage. You gotta remember that this is the only part of the sewer that people actually get to see. There was an enormous amount of time and energy spent designing and building the network of sewers underneath London that lead here. Once those get built, no one ever gets to see them. And so this building and everything inside of it is part of the sewer that you get to see. And Bazalgette decided to make it beautiful. And that's really, really cool.
So then why is Jony Ive, the man who shaped the simple, functional look of our present, so obsessed with this loud, ornate, 150-year-old Victorian pumping station?
So you imagine this idea that sewage used to flow freely down the streets.
Over the last few weeks, and now having visited Crossness, I've thought about this a lot.
And then suddenly, sewage was silently and predictably and consistently kept from streets. And the machines that achieved this were housed in cathedral-like structures. I mean, it's amazing.
If you listen to the entire answer that Jony Ive gives, you can tell that he's troubled by the effects that smartphones and social media have had on society. That for all of the good that they've brought, there has been some side effects that have been far from pleasant.
Certain products that I've been very, very involved with, I think there were some unintended consequences that were far from pleasant.
These devices and services that were meant to bring us closer together have also drawn us further apart. And he feels at least somewhat responsible, and he wants to help fix it.
My issue is that even though there was no intention, I think there still needs to be responsibility. And that weighs on me, as you know, heavily.
And I think this is at the heart of Ive's fascination with Crossness. The Industrial Revolution created a sanitation crisis. I mean, people were drowning in their own filth. But it was an unintended consequence of progress. And once they realized that, they owned it. And they didn't just build a functional solution, they built a beautiful one. The lesson at the core of Crossness is humanity's ability to solve a complex, self-inflicted problem.
In a way, I've got a really easy job, because when visitors come here, they are usually astounded by how it looks and understanding the role it plays in the creation of the modern city and the modern world. The world kind of changes at that. It's like a moment where everything changes.
Right.
And what we now take for granted, when it comes to, sanitation, when you flush your toilet or what have you, it didn't always used to be that way.
And what they built to solve it were these machines housed in cathedrals, designed to silently move waste so that people would never have to think about it again. It improved health, it improved sanitation, it improved lives. That ownership, that care for society, and the beauty that it's all manifest in is what Jony Ive sees in Crossness.
If you come to Crossness, we've got a little narrow gauge railway, and that sort of bypasses, which means you avoid having to go through the middle of the modern sewage treatment plant. So it's a very odd place for this attraction that is central to the creation of London, but also just the city, modern city more generally.